Welcome to the McCracken County Solar Virtual Public Information Meeting. My name is Chris Killenberg. I am the Regional Development Director for Community Energy and have been the lead developer for this project. Tonight we're going to go through the information about the project. All the information you hear tonight is also available on our website, and we are available to you by email or phone call for questions at any time. We're going to pause at periods through the presentation for questions and also have a question and answer session at the end. What I'm going to do now is just switch back to a slide and show you how to use your question functionality at the bottom of your screen. You'll see at the bottom right, there's an Ask a Question field. If you type a question in that field and hit send, it will show up in the top of that box as a question. If it's a question that you like and you wanted to add your support to, you can click the thumb and it will tally a vote for that question, if you will, and let us know that it's one that we want to make sure we answer. To the best of our ability, we'll answer any questions that come up. If we can't answer something, we will get back to you through the website by adding those questions to our frequently asked questions document. So our intent here is to provide as much information as possible, make ourselves available, but the conversation can continue after this evening. So please don't hesitate for yourselves, your friends, your neighbors to reach out to us at any time. So we'll get started. So I'm going to be the main presenter tonight. As I said, I'm the Regional Development Director for Community Energy. We also have with us, as available if needed, Chris Amsbury, who was the developer of this project in its earliest stages, who made arrangements with the landowners and met a number of local officials, and some of you may know Chris from his efforts. We're also joined by Marty Marcheterre, who's a senior environmental planner for Copperhead Environmental Consulting, Inc., which will tell you a little bit more about them shortly, and Rich Kirkland, who's a commercial appraiser for Kirkland Appraisals. Community Energy is a solar development company, and our role in this project is as developer. So the developer essentially does all the upfront work for a project, from the conception of the project, what market, what opportunity makes sense, through essentially to a shovel-ready project. We are not builders of solar farms, although we have built solar farms in the past. We're not typically the owner of the solar farm, although we do own some solar farms too, but our role here is really as the developer. All the front end work, the contracts, the studies, the surveys, the permits, etc. For this project, eventually there'll be a builder, and eventually there'll be an investor who will own and operate it. Community Energy has been in business for 21 years. We've done a lot of projects all over the country in both solar and wind, oftentimes the first of its kind in those markets. And Kentucky is a relatively new solar state, and this project would be one of the first projects in the state of Kentucky. Our headquarters is in Radnor, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. We have additional offices in Colorado and North Carolina. And we think of ourselves as an experienced and trusted and well-respected developer. We work hard to earn that reputation. So also joining us is a representative, Marty Marcheterre from Copperhead Environmental Consulting. They've done the environmental studies for the project. They're a multidisciplinary environmental consultant in business for 16 years. Their headquarters is in Paint Lick, Kentucky, out near Lexington. And also Rich Kirkland is here from Kirkland Appraisals. They're a commercial real estate appraiser in business for 17 years, offices in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Rich is a Kentucky State Certified General Appraiser. So as you can see, all three companies have been in business a considerable amount of time and have considerable amount of experience. So the presentation is going to basically be broken into 6 segments. First, a description of the project generally. What is it? What is a solar farm anyway? This may be new to some of you. Secondly, a discussion of the project site itself. And for some of you who are neighbors to the project, this would be of particular interest. What studies we performed for the project so far and what they tell us about the project site, what permits we're going to be seeking, a little bit about the construction and operation phase of the project, and then the project benefits. So first we'll start with a description of the project. McCracken County Solar is a proposed 60 megawatt solar farm located on 615 acres near the town of Kevel, north of Kevel. We'll sell 100% of the output of the solar farm to Big Rivers Electric Corporation, and it's under development by Community Energy. 60 megawatts means that on noon on a summer day, this solar farm would produce 60 million watts of power at that moment. To give you a sense of that, that's about half the peak demand of a small sized city like Paducah. So it's a lot of energy. At the same time, we are putting that electricity into a power line nearby that carries that amount of electricity all the time. So it's both a lot, but also not out of the ordinary. Why McCracken County? What led us here? Last year, Big Rivers Electric conducted a competitive bid process seeking to buy solar power under a long-term fixed price contract. Our bid for a project in McCracken County was one of the bids selected. And the result will be that you will have a locally produced power, but also low cost. It was a highly competitive bid. And part of our reasoning in our bid was to put a project in one of the service areas of Big Rivers. Jackson Purchase Electric is a customer, and to try to localize that production. I also want to emphasize the low-cost nature of this. Solar power used to be an expensive green energy, if you will, for homeowners and companies that wanted to pay a little extra, were willing to pay a little extra for it. Today, solar is very cost competitive. And so when Big Rivers went to buy solar electricity, it was compared to all their other sources and deemed to be cost effective. And so solar farms today really are not a niche project anymore. They're just a different kind of power plant. So we use the term solar farm, but what really is a solar farm? You're probably familiar with solar panels, which are about 3 foot by 5 foot rectangles. A solar farm really is just a whole lot of solar panels in an aggregation. They're typically black or dark blue. You've probably seen them on people's roofs, and they're brought together in large numbers to create a large electric generating system. A little bit more about the solar panels themselves. They're a pretty simple piece of equipment made of common materials, nothing hazardous, nothing fancy, basically a sandwich with glass, aluminum, and silicon and wiring. And it is the silicon, the solar cell and the silicon, that converts light to electricity. This is actually old technology. The solar panels that are used today are more efficient, yes, but not fundamentally different than the solar panels that were introduced back in the 70s, almost 50 years ago. They're very simple things. But to make a solar farm, we use a lot of them. And in this case, this proposed solar farm will have 156,000 solar panels. Those panels will be bolted to a system, a racking system that sits on the ground. In this case, it'll be a single axis tracking system that will rotate to follow the sun, tilting east in the morning, flattening out at noon, and then tilting west in the afternoon. And this creates a better angle on the sun, which makes them more productive. To build this system is very simple. First, a post similar to an I-beam is driven into the ground, sometime to a depth of 6 or 8 feet. Then a racking system is bolted to those posts, and the solar panels are bolted to the racks. So it's rather simple construction. And in the end, it's really more like equipment in a field than it is like a building or a permanent structure. Throughout the solar farm will be pieces of equipment that change the power from DC to AC. Solar panels produce DC power, which is similar to what you would have in a car battery. But what we need is AC power, which is what you use in your home. And the equipment that changes that is called an inverter. An inverter, as you can see, will be set up on a station or a pad, roughly 10 foot by 20 foot. And there'll be numbers of these positioned throughout the solar farm. The other thing we need to do is change the voltage of the electricity. You're probably familiar with the term transformer. In many of your neighborhoods on the power poles, there is a cylindrical can at the top. That's a transformer. What it's doing for your home is taking a high voltage and lowering it to a voltage you can use in your home. Here we're doing the opposite. We're taking a low voltage in the solar farm and we're stepping up to a higher voltage to put it into the power lines. So there'll be some transformers within the solar farm that will do that work to a certain level, and then there'll be a main transformer at the substation that increases it one more time to the voltage that's in the transmission lines to which we'll connect. That substation will be a new substation that we construct, roughly 150 feet by 150 feet square, and we'll have electrical equipment inside of it similar to what you see here. It will then connect to the transmission line that runs across the New Liberty Church Road and is owned by Big Rivers. And then that electricity will go into Big Rivers' transmission system, and it will go wherever it wants. Almost like water, electricity, once it gets in the power lines, just goes where it's needed and where it can go. So there's not a direct line between the solar electricity and anywhere particular. It's electricity just like any other electricity. And once it gets up into the power lines, it mixes with every other source. At this point, I just want to stop briefly and see if there are any questions anybody might have over what we've talked about so far. One of the questions that I'm asked sometimes is whether the solar panels contain hazardous materials. Well, what I want to tell you is they don't. As you saw in the earlier description, they're a very simple piece of equipment with simple materials, but there's no liquids in them. If they're damaged in a storm, nothing leaches out. When the project is over, those materials can be recycled. So it's a stable, inert piece of equipment that doesn't introduce any sort of hazardous material to the environment. All right, we'll proceed to the, oh, I'm sorry, I had one more item. The solar farm is going to be surrounded ultimately by a security fence that will be built in a number of sections. The solar farm will not be a continuum from one end to the other, but rather a series of sections that will be separated from another and will be individually fenced. In this case, typically there's a 6 foot tall or 7 foot tall chain link fence, sometimes topped with barbed wire, sometimes not. But the point is to keep people out. If people were to get in, all the surfaces are what we call touch safe. You would not get electrocuted touching a solar panel or any of the equipment. And any of the higher voltages are going to be put into conduit or ultimately buried underground so that they're safe to the touch. But we keep the fence up mostly to keep people out from damaging the equipment or hurting themselves, etc. And our staff will monitor security throughout the life of the project. So next I want to talk about the project site. The project will be located, as I said, northeast of Kevel in the western side of McCracken County and not too far from the gaseous diffusion plant. If you can see in the slide, the pink outline is the project location. The lighter outline is the nuclear plant, and in between essentially is the wildlife management area. It's that part of the county where this will be located. Specifically, it'll be located along New Liberty Church Road, on the eastern side of New Liberty Church Road, and essentially from Massey Road, which crosses perpendicular north, across the old Burnham School Road, which is now closed. Some refer to it as Taylor Lane. So that's the general location of the project. Currently, that land is mostly used for row cropping agriculture. The project, the solar farm itself will cover about 400 of the 615 acres, and the rest will be left mostly for buffer. The solar panels will be set back a significant distance such that no solar panel will be any closer than 500 feet to any neighboring residence. And in between, there's a significant amount of natural buffer along New Liberty Church Road and in other areas. And where no natural buffer exists, we'll plant a double row of evergreen plantings that will grow up to the height of the security fence. This would be our practice anyway. It will likely be required by the county as well, but our desire is to provide a visual buffer against the view of the solar farm for any neighbors or passersby. Looking at some subsections of the site, in the northern section of the site, essentially from Burnham School Road and north, you can see that the solar farm is set 500 feet roughly away from any adjacent houses, and all the mature natural buffer along New Liberty Church Road will be retained. Also, Burnham School Road is used by some local farmers to access fields in the back of the solar farm that will not be part of the solar farm. We will keep that open so that those farmers can still get to those fields. What we're calling the central part of the project would go from Burnham School Road, another half mile or so south, and we would introduce a second access road to the project at that point. Here again, most of the project is shielded from view by existing natural trees and undergrowth. One section of open field, we will plant the evergreen visual screen to protect those views. And again, in all cases, the solar panels will be at least 500 feet from any neighboring residence. And then finally, the last section, which essentially runs along Massey Road. This one is a little more open to view, and so we will be planting more evergreens along it. But nevertheless, it will be set back off the road, in this case, 100 feet off the road, and also 500 feet from adjacent neighbors. And then finally, there'll be a substation that we'll construct to connect to the Big Rivers transmission line. This is a little bit south on New Liberty Church Road, across from Jenkins School Road. It'll be back off the road a considerable distance and behind a set of trees. And in this case, too, we will retain the trees, and it should not be highly visible from the road, even though it'll be slightly taller than the solar farm. The stand of trees there is considerable, and the closest that substation will be to a residence is about 550 feet. So at this point, I would like to pause and see if there are any questions about the project layout. One of the questions that is asked sometimes is whether the solar panels will introduce any glare or heat. And the answer is no. The solar panels are designed to absorb light. They're actually treated with an anti-reflective coating, and so will not be a big mirror. I can't promise that at some angle, occasionally light will glint off a portion of it, but generally that's not a frequent occurrence and not a long duration of occurrence. And given all the substantial vegetative buffering, both natural and what we'll install, we don't think there'll be a glare issue at all. As for heat, solar panels can get hot to the touch in the same way your hood of your car will be hot to the touch in the sunlight, but the heat is not measurable at a close distance to the solar farms, and at any distance we're talking about here from neighbors, it'll have no effect on local heat or temperature levels. All right, let me move next to the studies that we've conducted so far. Copperhead Engineering has provided a series of environmental studies to us that include a wetlands delineation and stream delineation, where they've gone on site and identified those aquatic features that are likely to be subject to the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers and that should not be disturbed. And our intent in doing the study was to identify where they are and build around them. And we do not intend in any way to infringe upon impact wetlands or jurisdictional streams. We feel we can build everything we need to around them and leave them untouched and with an adequate riparian buffer. Copperhead also performed a cultural resources survey, essentially walking the site, looking for evidence or likelihood of historic and prehistoric artifacts, as well as looking at any architectural features of the site or nearby. And while they found some evidence of some locations that we'll go back to explore further, the initial reading is that there are not significant areas of significant artifacts that would be problematic for us to avoid. And again, our intention is to find those areas and stay away from them. Artifacts here include things like arrowheads and pottery, all the way through to Civil War relics, medals, that sort of thing. So we've done an initial examination of the site. We feel comfortable that we've got a pretty good understanding and that we'll be able to manage to avoid anything that we subsequently identify. Copperhead also performed a threatened and endangered wildlife species or habitat assessment. The concept here is to look for habitat that is likely to be a place where endangered wildlife would exist, live, roost, etc. And much of what is common in that area was ruled out. A number of bats may potentially roost in some of the areas of the site. Many of these areas we won't touch, or if we were to touch them, we can do so at times of the year that doesn't interrupt roosting. Nevertheless, we will explore this further, and prior to construction, we will know exactly what is where and what we can avoid. And again, we have a little bit more land than we need, and we do that purposefully so that we can move away from sensitive environmental areas as needed. Copperhead also performed for us an acoustical analysis. One of the concerns that has been expressed is whether the solar farm will be noisy. And the quick answer is no. And in my experience, the sounds that solar farms produce aren't audible from the security fence and beyond. But to put numbers on it, we did an acoustical analysis taking the exact equipment that we intend to use and the sound levels that the manufacturer provides to us, and doing some calculation around distances and the intermediate area. And the loudest noise level at any one point in the project was somewhere below 40 decibels, which in the chart that you see here is somewhere between crickets or birds or a distant dog bark, all of which would occur during the daytime when there are other noises going on that would compete with it. And so we're confident that no adjacent residences will be able to hear any noises from the solar farm at any significant level or significant frequency that would be problematic. We also conducted an impact study, a property value impact study, to determine the potential for the solar farm to have an impact on adjacent property values. The study looks at 6 criteria that tend to drive property values, which include hazardous materials, and in this case, the solar farm will not be introducing any hazardous materials to the area. Odor, the solar farm will not have any odor associated with it. Noise, which we addressed in the prior slide, which we feel will be minimal at its origination, and by the time you get to a distance and with the trees, won't be noticeable to neighbors. Traffic will be significant during construction, and we're going to need to work to make sure that we have the minimum impact to the local area during construction, when there'll be workers and trucks coming and going for the 6 to 9 month construction period. After that, there'll be about 2 to 3 full-time employees for the solar farm, and that amount of traffic will not be a significant detriment to the area. I'll come back to stigma and go to appearance next. Solar farms are low facilities, generally 10 feet high and spread out horizontally. So the primary appearance in a flat area like McCracken County is going to be at its edges. And as we described before, most of the solar farm will be back behind a significant amount of natural vegetation, trees, etc. And where it's not, we intend to plant evergreens to screen it. And so we feel, and it was the assessment of the study, that the appearance would not be detrimental to neighboring properties. However, anybody on the call or subsequently that has a concern, please reach out to us. We're in the design phase. We have the ability at this point to make changes and add and do things that might bolster the visual screening, and we're completely open to that. So I urge anybody on this call to reach out to us. Stigma is an interesting question. Does a solar farm add or subtract to the neighborhood by reputation? You think of liquor stores or other establishments that might have a negative stigma. So it's thought that solar farms would not have a negative stigma, may have a positive stigma, and therefore would not impact local property values. I just call it out because I found it interesting to think about a solar farm in that way. And the final study that we're in the middle of is what's called an interconnection study. This solar farm will sell 100% of its output to Big Rivers. To do so, we will connect to a Big Rivers owned transmission line that runs from a substation in West Paducah up to a substation in Shell at the northern corner of the county, actually just over the county line. And we know from talking to Big Rivers that that power line is sufficient to accept all the generation we will create with the solar farm. The question is, what happens next? Big Rivers is part of a broader transmission network called MISO, which stretches from Minnesota to Louisiana and everywhere in between. And so, as I described, electricity goes where it wants. And so in this case, if the solar power goes on the line and goes to the substations and goes beyond, would there be an effect on the system? Would there be an upgrade needed somewhere to accept a new and large supply of electricity? We don't know yet, but MISO is doing a study of that to tell us that. And if so, because we would cause that upgrade, the project would pay for that upgrade. So no cost of this would trickle down to ratepayers of any kind. We would be paying for the upgrade. We have done enough of these and have had a private engineering firm look at this to think that substantial upgrades will not be needed related to this project, but I just wanted to identify it as a study that we are also conducting. At this point, I will pause again and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, I'll continue on. Let's talk about the permits that the project will need. We'll essentially need two significant permits, one from the county and one from the state. The permit from the county will be a conditional use permit. McCracken County is in the process now of finalizing a solar ordinance, which would establish the rules for solar farms, which would be the basis on which our conditional use permit application will be evaluated and decided. We're pretty confident that they will adopt regulations that are typical for jurisdictions across the Southeast and in Kentucky. They've been using ordinances from other communities in Kentucky as an example. They've sought our input, but certainly we have not had a hand in authoring it. But we expect that that will be available this spring. And then once available, we'll be in position to present a plan and seek a conditional use permit from the county. That permit will go before the Planning Commission. And so you and your neighbors and friends and anybody who has an interest can participate in that process by attending the Planning Commission meetings, by providing your feedback and input and comments. We will publish on our website the dates and times of the meetings at which we will be appearing. The county will also publish their meeting schedule and agendas. So you can keep track of the process in that way, and we invite you to participate. And as always, if you have any questions or want to know where this stands, there is an email address on the website and a phone number. Call us anytime. We'd be happy to keep you up to date on our process with the county. As I mentioned, there's a solar ordinance in development, and typical regulations in a solar ordinance are things like setbacks, which we've discussed, screening, which we discussed, and decommissioning, which is an important thing to understand. At the end of the solar farm, at the end of the life of the solar farm, there needs to be a plan for removing the solar panels and the racks and the posts I described and returning the land back to its original condition, at which time it can go back into agriculture or some other use. And so to do that, prior to construction, we established a plan for the decommissioning and restoration of the property. That's conducted by a third-party engineer unrelated to the project and describes the cost of removal, the value of any salvageable materials, and establishes the cost of decommissioning the project. At that point, we have an obligation to our landowners to post some financial security to pay for that. The county is also going to require us to post some security to pay for that, so that no matter what happens, there's always funds accessible to the landowner or the county to pay someone to remove the solar farm and restore the property. And all of that is determined and established and set in place prior to construction. If you have any questions about this or other aspects of the solar ordinance, The Planning and Zoning Administration information is available on this slide. A similar slide is on our website. So if you want to look this up or contact Greg Cannon at some point, here is that information. So the second permitting process will be this with the state of Kentucky. And here we'll be seeking what's called a construction certificate. A construction certificate is required for any electric generating system that produces more than 10 megawatts. And in our case, as I described earlier, we're 60 megawatts. And so what happens is that the Public Service Commission establishes what's called a siting board, and the siting board will review the project with a focus on three areas: the environmental impact of things such as noise and visual impacts that we already described. They rely on the state agencies to look at wetlands and wildlife, etc. They're more interested in those environmental matters that are affecting the local neighborhood and community, such as noise and visual impacts. They'll also look at the economic impacts, the spending, the jobs, the taxes, the benefits. Is the project a cost-benefit winner? Is it worth doing because it generates significant economic impact? And then lastly, they'll look at the impact on the electric transmission grid. And in this case, they'll really be looking at what MISO, in their study I just described, says, so that they can be sure that we're not causing significant disruption to the transmission system. The siting board is composed of 7 members. 3 of them are the 3 members of the Public Service Commission, the chairman, vice chairman, and commissioner. 2 of them are members of specific state government cabinets, the Cabinet for Energy Environment and the Cabinet for Economic Development. And then the last 2 are local. The chairman of the McCracken County Planning Commission, currently Wayne Elliott, and then a resident of the county that will be appointed by the governor. And oftentimes the governor asks the judge executive for a recommendation there. The purpose of the local participants is to be sure that the board gets a full flavor of the local response to the project, pro and con. And it comes from people who know the area, who live here, who may know some of the neighbors, may know some of the participants, and have a true sense of what's going on the ground. The process will take approximately 9 months, and will start in April. And the steps will include a public meeting, which we're having tonight, an application in April, and then a series of hearings thereafter, where the siting board will ask questions, call us up to testify, make available to the proceedings local interested parties, neighbors, etc. And that hearing process and the question and answer process is multi-iterations, so that there's an opportunity for the siting board to hear and fully answer all the questions they have before a decision that they would make on the construction certificate, which is anticipated in Q4 of this year. After that, there's an appeal period if anybody feels that they have made the judgment incorrectly. On the website, in a number of places, is some information about this process, which shows you the more specific steps and shows you how you can participate if you so choose to do. And also, if you go to the Public Service Commission website, you will see all of the filings related to this project. The case number is 2020, which is this year, 00392. That information also is available on the website in a couple of different places. Or, as always, if you have any questions, please reach out and contact us. I'll stop here again to see if anybody has any questions. And just so you know, your microphones are live, so if you wish to speak up, we can hear you. we'll move on. Let's talk a little bit about the construction and operation stages of the project. If the construction certificate is approved by the siting board, construction will start in 2022. The construction period will be roughly 6 to 9 months and will generate approximately 150 construction jobs. The good thing about these jobs is that most of them do not require prior experience or specific skill set. Again, a solar farm is a relatively simple thing, and the work that goes into building it is relatively simple work. Able-bodied people can do the work. And so at a time when there may still be unemployment concerns when we get around to this project, the opportunity for local people of all skill abilities to get a job on the project is significant. There will be also be some hiring of local trades, specifically electric, of course, surveying, earth moving, fencing, landscaping, things like that. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, community energy won't be the constructing the solar farm. And so the decisions around who gets hired will not be ours. But what we do is, along the way, as neighbors and friends and locals and regional businesses reach out to us and ask about work, we keep a running list of contractors and individuals who have an interest in work on the project. And when the time comes to hand this off to a construction company, we provide that list and encourage them to open their bidding and open their employment processes to locals. We feel strongly that this should be a generator of local economic activity. Once the project is in operation, there'll be roughly 2 to 3 full-time employees on the job every day. Again, it's a simple system, so it doesn't take a lot of people to run and monitor it, but it's a steady, regular amount of work. Preventive maintenance on moving parts and engine or motors and things like that that wear out over time. Repair due to storms or some variety of circumstances. Periodically, solar panels will stop working or get damaged somehow. Mowing the grass is a big part of the operations and maintenance. And here, typically, a mowing contract is awarded locally. So I know there have already been a few local people who have expressed an interest in that. There won't be a lot of employees coming and going. There may or may not be a small office trailer related to the project. Largely, solar farms are quiet and relatively trouble-free and just sit in the field and generating electricity without a lot of extra work. At the end of the day, this solar farm will produce 140 million kilowatt hours of electricity per year. To give you a sense of that scale, that's roughly the equivalent of what half of the households in McCracken County consume each year. As I said before, the electricity will go in a variety of places, may go to houses, may go to businesses, but the amount of electricity in total is roughly the amount of half the electricity consumed by all the households in McCracken County. So over 615 acres, that's quite a significant amount of production. All of that power will be sold and delivered to Big Rivers Electric Corporation for the first 20 years of the project at least. Let me talk a little bit about the project benefits. I touched on this before. We like to say that, you know, solar farms do more than generate electricity. They also generate economic growth. And we're serious about that and like to do everything we can to make this a positive economic project for the county and the local area. So among those positive impacts include the construction jobs that I mentioned, the construction contracts that I mentioned. But during construction, there'll be quite a lot of local spending on hotels, restaurants, shops, gas, all sorts of odds and ends. With 150 people coming and going and active, there'll be, and other contractors coming from out of town, there'll just be a lot of economic activity in local businesses, which is a good thing. There'll also be quite a significant amount of tax revenue that comes off the solar farm. Taxes are generally levied against value. Right now, the county collects very little value from the land because it's farmland. And in addition to being assessed at a low value, some of it gets a tax break at a lower value for use for farming. That will change when it becomes a solar farm. So the county will assess more taxes on the land itself, but the big win for the county is to assess the taxes on the solar equipment, which is very high in value. And so that'll generate hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes a year for the county on land that's now generating less than $10,000 a year. And it does so without an offsetting expense of schools and roads and libraries and other things that would be associated with housing and that kind of development. So it really is a pretty big net tax winner for the county. And then lastly, as I mentioned, it will generate 2 to 3 full-time, well-paying jobs over the long course of the project life. So in summary, I've always appreciated this point, that in a single hour, the amount of solar power that strikes the Earth is more than the entire world consumes in a year. We are constantly surrounded by an incredible amount of energy, and the solar industry has grown to a point where we can now capture that energy in a cost-effective manner, increasingly in an efficient manner that uses less and less land or is more and more productive for the land, and start to become a real part of the energy landscape. Solar probably will not be the sole answer to the energy needs of this country or world, but we believe it will be a considerable part of the energy profile heading forward. And the fact that we've now gotten costs down to where it is a cost-effective choice is a big part of the optimism for that future. So we are committed to developing solar projects that meet that future, but are also respectful of our neighbors and deliver multiple benefits to the communities that we serve. And we really take that commitment seriously. And so tonight's meeting, subsequent interactions, subsequent meetings, our intent is to explain what we are doing, get your feedback, make the project the best project it can be. And we're open to your questions, comments, and feedback at any time for that purpose. Our contact information is here on this slide, also available on our website by email or telephone. I encourage you to reach out to us at any time, and we will be sure to get right back to you. As questions come in that would be broadly of interest to any interested party, we will add to our frequently asked questions document on the website so that you can see if there's some new questions that have been brought up. But again, feel free to contact us at any time. So at this point, if there are any questions that we can answer, we'd be glad to do so. I believe everybody's microphones are live. So if you have a question or an observation, feel free to speak up. One of the questions that someone asked me recently was whether the solar panels will have any effect on the Paducah Regional Airport. One of the things we study is that question, and how it works is there's a tool that the FAA provides where we can provide the coordinates and the elevations and the height of what we're building to the FAA, and they'll tell us whether or not we're a a risk to airports, navigational risk to airports. As you can imagine, because we're so low, we're not. You might think of glare. I think I mentioned before that solar panels don't really display any glare, so much so that there are now solar farms being built on the grounds of airports themselves. But I'll let you know that we've gone through that study, and it was determined that this solar farm would not be a hazard to air traffic in and out of the Paducah Regional Airport. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? Well, if not, I'll say thank you for attending and listening. A recording of this presentation will also be available on the website. So if you have friends or neighbors who are unable to make it, please let them know that, and they can hear my words along with all the other information on the website. We're really proud of this project. We look forward to working with the community. We appreciate your interest, and we hope to see you again sometime in the near future. Thank you.